Well, good evening and welcome to Episcopus Admiratio, Wandering Bishop. Not literally wandering, but just literally wandering. Just thinking aloud. And I'll be honest, there are lots of things one could talk about at the moment, but in some ways, I don't know about you, but I'm just a bit fed up with it all at the moment. Good evening, Rich. Good evening, Adrian. Good evening, Leonardo. Hope you're all well. Hope you're all surviving. Good evening, Barbara. Yes, so Wandering Bishop then is literally just me wandering aloud. And by all means, we can be interactive. So feel free to comment, and we can even have a little discussion if you like. I don't know how your day's been. Here, the weather in Brighton, UK has been nice and sunny. Quite hot, a bit too hot for people who have to wear cassocks, but I've spent most of the day indoors, catching up on paperwork and things. Zoom meetings, of course. Today we had our Faith Council for the city. Two interesting speakers today. We had Helen from the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership and Daniel Singleton from the Faith Action Network, which is an extension of it effectively is the secretariat arm of the All Parliamentary Party group on faith and society. So two very interesting speakers today. Helen, primarily from the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership. Brighton and Hove Food Partnership, that's right. Basically telling us some surprising statistics, as you, I am sure, aware that during the pandemic, various food banks and other charities have been cooperating together across the city to provide hot meals and essential food shopping supplies to a variety of vulnerable people. And today, for example, we learned that last year, this sort of time last year, about 400 plus clients were serviced by the food banks, but that an average of 3,000 plus people are now being supported by the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership a week. 3,000 plus people across the city of Brighton and Hove a week. And that's a mixture of hot food, some kind of meals on wheels, and then, as I say, essential shopping items. Over 3,000 people across the city in Brighton and Hove a week, with an estimated grocery bill of about 48,000. 48,000 a month, which is so on the one hand, of course, that is an amazing effort by people, on the whole, volunteers and sponsors, both corporate and private individuals, who have stumped up and provided all that food and all that help, all that voluntary service given in putting the food parcels together, in delivering the food parcels, in answering phones, coordinating the drivers, cooking, preparing the meals, sourcing the ingredients, etc., etc. So it's an amazing effort for the city. On the other hand, though, it's also, something of a shocking statistic to learn that over 3,000 people a week are relying on that service. And of course, part of the reason for our discussion at Faith Council about this today is that the projections going forward are that at least that number of people, if not more, may become increasingly dependent on that service. This because, of course, of the economic downturn. A lot of people who are not working, a lot of people who are already facing the stark choice between food and paying bills, like rent and mortgages and all the rest of it, and through no fault of their own, simply because their job has been cancelled effectively because of the lockdown. Some, of course, some people's jobs have been furloughed, meaning that the government is subsidising 80% of their salaries to their employers. But a large number of people in this city working in the hospitality catering industries, on a 0 contract hour basis, etc., they've not been furloughed; they've just been sacked, or effectively their job just doesn't exist. And the chances are that this is only going to get worse, not better. So that one of the councillors for the city today was telling our meeting that we need a strategy now for 12 months. 12 months to try and keep this voluntary food service provision going. 12 months. Now, as I reflected on this program about 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, we're already in a situation where we've expended, so as far as charities are concerned, where they've expended pretty much everything they've got already. The Food Partnership itself has managed to source funding, which will take us up to September. But in terms of 12 months, a 12-month strategy, the fear, of course, is, how is that sustainable? How is that doable? Especially as, the food provision service is relying on charities. Charities, of course, are relying on people to give donations. If the economic downturn, if the economic situation continues as it is, if it gets worse, where are those donations going to come from? Where is the money going to come from? Because people won't be able to give. They won't be able to afford to give. Now, government apparently is going to stump up some more cash. So we'll see how that fares. I know it always sounds, it sounds brilliant when you hear the government giving millions to this, that, and everything else. But actually, by the time that's all broken down and spent, it doesn't really come to anything very much. It doesn't really come to anything very much. The accommodation bill for the council at the moment for the 200 odd plus homeless people that were put into accommodation, so they weren't on the streets, in order to keep them safe and protected from infection. That bill is phenomenal. And again, one of the councillors in a meeting either last week or the week before was saying that unless funding comes in, they're not sure how they're going to be able to pay, essentially, to keep vulnerable people off the streets. Now, as it turns out, they've been able to do a deal with Sussex University, so they're using one of the halls of residence, but that's only fine until September, of course, when the university reopens and presumably students will return. So the council is scrabbling around at the moment, trying to find, ideally, a hotel, if not some scheme with private landlords, in order to help, in order for these people to be able to have some accommodation. Now, the thing is, of course, is that what we'd all like to do is not just provide accommodation, not just provide some shelter, but also support them and provide the opportunity, utilizing that time to get them sorted. So there are all sorts of ideas at the moment, all sorts of discussions at the moment going on about how we continue to provide food for them, because these people, they need, a proper diet, proper staple diet, in order to be properly nourished, and B, how do we support them going forward in being able to essentially no longer be homeless. So we're looking at mentoring schemes or befriending schemes to enable, so that some of these people, of course, who've been living on the streets for so long, effectively they need social rehabilitation, as it were. So in order to be reintegrated into society. That sounds, I know how it sounds, but of course, for some of these people, it's a necessary personal goal and development in order for them to be able then to apply for a job and hold a job down, etc. They've got to relearn how to engage and interact with people appropriately. They've also got to learn how to manage finances, which of course for some of them is probably the reason why they got into homelessness in the first place, because they couldn't cope with that. So the idea of mentors is not just for moral support, not just to be a friendly face and to have a shoulder to cry on, etc., but also essentially to be able to help these people learn life skills, so that they will be able to continue to sustain themselves going forward. And life skills includes not just social behavior and interaction, but also to shopping, cooking basic foods, managing a household budget, paying bills, etc. So there's a lot going on at the moment, one could say. A lot of meetings at the moment and a lot of discussions, trying to plan ahead. We're trying to strategize now for the future, even though the future, of course, itself is somewhat uncertain. Now we hear predictions of a second wave, likely perhaps in September, October, or October, November. Of course, it wouldn't surprise me for such a thing to happen. Is normally certainly the change of season, October, November, can certainly is a usual time for flu, etc., to rise up, but we're being told now that there may be a second wave. That's if a second wave doesn't hit us before then. As I was reliably informed the other day, although the paper today is saying that we haven't had any more deaths locally for 2 days, actually no, sorry, it's 72 hours. Nonetheless, the infection rate in hospital has gone up again. Now, whether or not that's anything to do with the public demonstrations that have been going on, who knows? But that's the situation locally at the moment. So there's all of that going on. And that's keeping me occupied. And if that weren't enough, various things going on for the church, various issues, of course, going on in society at the moment, whole Black Lives Matter thing. Then there's the abortion bill from Northern Ireland, which, if you hadn't heard, was passed last evening, Monday evening. The House of Lords voted 355 to 77 in favour of a motion approving the UK government's abortion bill for Northern Ireland, and this is, by the way, this is quite an extreme bill. This is not the same as the provision that we have already in the UK. This is going further, so that it will allow abortions up to 28 weeks. And there are all sorts of issues with this bill. And what's particularly disturbing is that, just to give you some history background to it, of course, last July, so almost a year ago, the Houses of Parliament voted through what was really an imposition upon Northern Ireland of abortion legislation. Up until then, Northern Ireland had been relatively free of abortion. Abortion was permitted, but in very constrained circumstances, literally life-threatening scenarios. But in the absence of an assembly, the UK Parliament decided to impose abortion legislation on Northern Ireland. And the vote now that occurred last night in the House of Lords, and that will probably occur tomorrow in the House of Commons, is basically to, as it were, cement the imposition of that bill. And this is despite the vast majority, 72% of a poll of people in Northern Ireland said that they don't want this new bill. They don't want these abortion laws that are being particularly imposed upon them. Likewise, the National Assembly in Northern Ireland as well, almost unanimously doesn't want this new abortion legislation. And effectively, what this new legislation does is provide abortion on demand, basically. And I wish I could find the, bear with me 1 second, I'll just see if I can find the, what basically it permits. But it's not good. I mean, in other words, babies can be aborted for things like cleft palate, let me just see if I can find here. And what's also rather disappointing, aside from the bill itself, apart from the legislation itself, is the lack of input by the Lord's spiritual, meaning the Church of England bishops that sit in the House of Lords. They have, well, for the vote last July, none of the Lord's spiritual were there. There are 26 bishops of the Church of England who are able to sit in the House of Lords. Last July, none of them were present in the chamber for the 2 days the legislation was discussed and voted upon. And apparently this time, sadly, the attendance was not much better. There was attendance, but what it was just might as well have not been there. What's particularly shocking, perhaps, as well, is that now, of course, there are women Church of England bishops. None of them spoke about the bill. for or against. Bearing in mind that one of them is a former midwife and chief nurse for the nation. She didn't speak, neither did others. Which just begs the question, well, what is the point then of their having a seat in the House of Lords? If they're not going to turn up for morally relevant and important legislation discussions, what is the point? I mean, you know for certain that if I had a seat in the House of Lords and a vote and a discussion was there about the board, I'd be there and I'd speak up. But what is the point? They are supposed to be, they are supposed to contribute, as it were, particularly on moral issues that are brought before Parliament. Now, of course, part of the problem is that really, such is the level of, sorry to say it, but I can only speak as I find, such is the level of apostasy in the Church of England, that even if they were to speak, many of us would probably not think their contribution particularly morally right or justifiable. That's the sad truth of it, that's the difference between Catholics and Protestants, effectively. But I think it's a criminal shame that having that position, to not use it, that's just criminal, Now, I'm trying to find where. Here we go. Okay. So they can abort now. So this new legislation will allow for the abortion of Down syndrome babies between 24 weeks gestation up to birth. 24 weeks gestation up to birth. A Down syndrome baby can be aborted. Under the new regime, disability selective abortion will be available up to the point of birth for all disabilities, including cleft lip, cleft palate, club foot, and Down syndrome. So a woman could be carrying a baby almost to term. I mean, effectively within days of giving birth, and can have it terminated on the grounds of disability, on the grounds of really superficial disability, simply because the baby might be born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, despite the fact that modern surgery, of course, can sort that out no problem today. They can kill their baby literally days before birth. I mean, this really is quite outrageous, and really quite disgusting when you think about it. And Down syndrome, Down syndrome people are some of the most beautiful people I know. Some of the most lovely people I know. And the idea, the thought that somebody would just want to kill them just beggars belief. I mean, my experience of people born with disabilities on the whole is their wonderful capacity to generate charity around them. To encourage people to find the best of themselves and express the best of themselves. Just seems incredible to me that also too, gender selective abortion is permitted. gender selective abortion is permitted, meaning that if you're going to get a girl and you wanted a boy, you're allowed to abort the girl. Also, too, apparently, re-twins. You can choose to abort one of the twins and only have one baby. Seriously, this is the nature of the legislation that is being imposed on Northern Ireland. It's just incredible. It just beggars belief. It really does. Also, now of course, at the present time, some of you may know, but at the present time, women are allowed to self-administer abortion pills at the moment because of the restrictions on clinical services. This legislation for Northern Ireland will allow that carte blanche, so that women will be able to take abortifacient drugs, administer them to themselves at home, without requiring a prescription, so without seeking a doctor's opinion, as it were. Now, I remember when this permissiveness came out for the pandemic situation, I remember thinking to myself at the time, well, hold on a minute, wasn't one of the strongest arguments for legalizing abortion the avoidance of so-called backstreet abortions? And because of the threat to lives that they posed. Now, of course, as has been subsequently proved, the claims about backstreet abortions at the time, back then in 1960s, was considerably exaggerated. Nonetheless, you know, they did exist, and where they existed, they were not good. But then now, to allow women to just take a pill at home, just beggars belief. How is that caring for them? You know, there are all sorts of complications that can happen re-aborting a baby. It's not something that somebody should be doing on their own. It's not something that somebody should be doing without advice, without clinical counsel and advice. It's not something that somebody should go through alone, without appropriate support, surely. You know, exactly because if things go wrong, and by the way, this means that teenage girls can take abortifacient drugs without prescription, without informing their parents, without consulting a medic. They can take them, administer them themselves. Now just think about that for a minute. How is a teenage girl supposed to be able psychologically and emotionally to cope, especially if something goes wrong? And without wanting to go into graphic details, there are all sorts of things that can go wrong, even just from taking abortifacient pills. And part of the problem, for sure, for example, is when they take the pills. If they take if they're taking a pill, popping a pill within maybe 2 or 3 days of conception, probably not an issue. If they're trying to abort a baby by pills 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, there could be serious complications. It's just, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It makes me feel physically sick, Barbara, as well, I have to say. It just beggars belief. It really does. It really does. Father Raphael, speechless. Yeah. Yeah. It's just amazing. And what was also incredible was that Lord, now let me find his name, bless him, I don't want to get it wrong. Lord Shinkwin, who is a peer, he's a member of the House of Lords. He suffers with brittle bone disease, so he's disabled. He made very good points. He said they should that the newer legislation discriminates and perpetuates stereotypes against those with a disability. Of course it does. If you're telling people that it's okay to terminate Down syndrome pregnancies, it's okay to terminate babies that might have a cleft lip or a cleft palate, etc. What are you saying then about disabled people? What are you saying about disabled people? You're effectively saying they're less than human, aren't you? You're effectively saying they are abnormal, there is something wrong with them, etc. Rather than just having an appreciation for difference, as it were, you're actually saying they're not normal. Because what you're saying is that a normal baby wouldn't have a cleft lip, or wouldn't have a cleft palate, or wouldn't have a club foot, or wouldn't look like a Down syndrome. By saying that it's okay to abort them up to birth, well, you might as well round up disabled people now and kill them, mightn't you? What's the difference? What is the moral difference? If it's okay to kill them before they're born, why is it, why is it not okay to kill them when they're alive? It beggars belief, it really does. I don't understand the mentality of people around this. And he goes on, Lord Shinkwin, to say, although technically the regulations only relate to Northern Ireland, the whole UK Parliament is being invited to endorse them and to thereby legitimise disability discrimination, which of course it is. What's more is that if this is passed for Northern Ireland, how long will it be before they amend the current abortion laws for the rest of the UK? Think about that. How long will it be before they permit carte blanche across the UK? The termination, the murder, the termination of disabled children in the womb. It's just sickening. It's just sickening. So I mean, the whole context of the greater license of permissiveness is itself. I mean, I don't see how you can morally justify allowing teenage girls to take abortifacient drugs without prescription, without consultation with a doctor, without consultation with their parents. I mean, that's just irresponsible. Completely irresponsible. Yeah. And then, as I say, to have so-called Lords Spiritual who don't even turn up, or if they do turn up, don't speak, or if they do speak, only speak in favour of it all. Only speak in favour of it all. And this, by the way, is despite the fact that earlier this year, the House of Bishops of the Church of England said that 98.3% of abortions taking place in the UK are immoral. Now they give but what they mean by that, of course, is that those abortions that take place basically on an on-demand basis and with a really liberal interpretation of the current rules are immoral. That's what they're saying. Now, in 2018, 196,083 abortions were carried out in the UK. 1.7% were carried out under the strict terms of the law. And those are, for example, a risk to the life of the pregnant woman, to prevent permanent injury, physically or mental, of the pregnant woman, to save the life of a pregnant woman, to prevent grave permanent injury to physical or mental health, and substantial risk child will suffer physical or mental abnormalities. Substantial. The vast majority of abortions carried out in the UK do not fit those criteria, and we've known for a long time. We've known for years. The legislation requires 2 doctors' opinions, and we know that doesn't happen. In fact, we know that in some abortory clinics, doctors have pre-signed permissions that somebody else just has to countersign, and that is done. And what's amazing is that these are National Office of Statistic figures. So this has not come from pro-life charities. These statistics, 196,083 abortions for 2018, that comes from the National Office of Statistics. And they report that only 1.7% of those were carried out according to the legal permissions. And we've just just recently, the statistics for last year were published. The highest rate of abortions ever in the UK, 209,519 abortions last year in the UK. And again, the vast majority of those will not have been according to the strict terms of the legislation, the current legislation for the UK. So it's appalling. And what's amazing is that the new legislation proposed for Northern Ireland, rather than prevent the abuse of legislation, is instead basically enshrining the abuses into legislation. That's why the new legislation for Northern Ireland is saying, you can, if you're not happy with the sex of the child, you can terminate their life. If you're not happy with the way they're going to look when they're born, you can terminate their life. Right up to birth. What's more, they're not allowing conscientious objection for medical staff. They're going to have to do it, part of their job. They don't get a choice whether they, so irrespective of their personal beliefs, irrespective of their religious beliefs, they will be expected to perform the abortions. This is just appalling. Every which way you look at it, it's just disgusting. Just disgusting. There is time, if you're inclined, to write to your MP ahead of tomorrow's vote in the House of Commons. For those local here who belong to the for those in Brighton and Hove, I can tell you now there's no point writing to our MPs. A, because I already have. B, because I get the same answer each time. They're not interested in discussing the views of their constituents on this matter. They see it as a personal vote, a matter for them as a person to decide. You know, that's an aspect, my brothers and sisters, of our so-called democratic system. MPs don't perceive themselves to be there to represent us. But if you live elsewhere, then you think it's worth a shot, then you've got till tomorrow to contact your MP and register your concern. There we go. Hugo Walker, are there actually Orthodox or Roman Catholic communities in continental Europe? Yes, indeed there are. Yes, several across the continent. Who else is around? Yes, so yes, I'm rather disappointed, of course, about all that at the present moment. In other matters, I know some of you watch the Daily Mass. You'll have heard my homily yesterday. I was speaking about a meeting by the council later in the day, where new policy guidance was being voted on regarding the new RSE curriculum, relationships and sex education, with a suggestion that aside from what the government has legislated for the curriculum, that this new policy guidance wanted to suggest to our schools locally that they might source other resources and materials to use. So in other words, extracurricular. So although the new RSC legislation is already quite permissive, this policy guidance wants schools to be able to use even more, to use materials that are not part of the curriculum. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that so far, despite the legislation being announced last year, to my knowledge, so far there are no what's the word? No parental consultations have taken place yet. So this new RSE curriculum, this new relationships and sex education curriculum, was announced last year for implementation this coming new academic year in September. And all schools are supposed to set their curriculum and then present their curriculum and the resources they're going to use to teach that curriculum to parents, so that parents, not necessarily so parents can give approval, as it were, but so that parents can see what their children are going to be taught, and then, if they wish, take their children out of those classes. And as I say, already the new legislation, the new curriculum is quite permissive, shall we say, and now locally somebody is asking the council to grant local education authority schools license to use resources and materials not recommended nor suggested nor approved by the legislated curriculum. So myself and a councillor colleague put together some questions for the meeting yesterday to ask on what basis was this wider permissiveness being sought. Who's asked? Bearing in mind that the RSE curriculum hasn't even been implemented yet, it doesn't come in till this September. Who is asking for greater permissiveness or wider permissiveness to use resources and materials not approved nor included within the current legislated for curriculum? Now, apparently there is an answer that has been recorded in the press, so I've got to try and find that. I've just had a text to tell me that that it's mentioned, but I know, you see, from the faith perspective, well, there you go. You see now, there's a headline for you: updated sex lessons to include pornography, consent, and online safety. Teenagers will be taught about pornography, consent, and online safety in school. Do we really need to teach kids about pornography? So the committee held a virtual meeting yesterday. Councillors were told it went beyond the guidance they were proposing, went beyond what was required by law. Now, it's interesting. Yeah, okay. You see, a consultation exercise did take place informally with representatives of the faith communities, but essentially our concerns were not heard. So we were invited to have a discussion, although we weren't. Well, actually, you see, what's particularly pernicious about this is that we weren't actually presented with the alternative materials that they want to introduce to the schools that are extracurricular. So we thought we were having a discussion about the existing curriculum, the proposed curriculum for implementation in September. Whereas, as I read now here, it's being mispresented as though we were agreeing stuff concerning this new proposal for wider permissiveness for extracurricular stuff. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. That's very annoying. That's very annoying indeed. Yeah, so that's going to be occupying my thoughts for the next few days. I shall certainly be contacting the person who is falsely claiming to have consulted us on the extracurricular stuff, because we weren't consulted on that. We weren't consulted on that at all. If anything, the point being laboured to us, basically to assuage our fears, was that what was contained within the legislated curriculum was, fairly innocuous, fairly bland, etc., etc. We were not consulted about extra curricular stuff, so that's rather disappointing. Rather disappointing. So there we go. So that's I don't know, a little window into my thoughts at the present time, with various things that are going on. So bless you for watching. Now, let's just see here. Are you planning to establish a cathedral? No. Why would I? Could there be locations based communities on the communion website? Yes, there is one actually in what's the word? Preparation. There is one in preparation. But if Hugo, you want to tell me where you are, then I can tell you where you can find old Romans near you. The thing to bear in mind sometimes is that cells and smaller church communities are meeting in private oratories and residencies, so they tend not to want to display their exact location. But we're working on a directory of at least contact numbers and email addresses for those sort of situations. Why no cathedral? Okay, all right, let's entertain this for a moment, because I generally, for Hugo's benefit, I don't generally talk about particularly ecclesiastical stuff on this show, but I did last week sort of wander into a bit of history, ecclesiastical history. So if others don't mind, I'll answer this question: why no cathedral? Essentially because old Romans, we don't claim jurisdiction in the conventional sense. So you will notice that old Roman bishops are all titular bishops. They have titular sees in lieu of, instead of, as it were, jurisdictional, geographical sees. So, for example, the Archbishop of Canterbury is technically the Bishop of Canterbury. He's also the primate of all England, or England, I can't remember. But anyway, so historically, the Archbishop of Canterbury has the See of Canterbury, which is basically Kent, and a cathedral, which of course houses his cathedra, his chair, his seat. And that, of course, is the usual pattern in most places, where somebody is claiming a geographical jurisdiction. Bishops of titular sees, so often this is a phenomenon that occurs for assistant bishops. in the Roman system, for example, auxiliary bishops. So if somebody is, for example, in Westminster, so the Archdiocese of Westminster, you have Cardinal Nichols, who is the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster. So effectively, Westminster is his diocese, but he is assisted, I think, by about 4 or maybe 6 auxiliary bishops. The argument being, of course, that he can't be everywhere to perform confirmations and so on and so forth. So he is assisted by auxiliary bishops. Now, of course, those auxiliary bishops, they can't be bishops of Westminster, because you only have 1 bishop per see. So instead, they are made auxiliary bishops, so assistant bishops, and they are given titular see titles. Now, this stems from the first millennium, when, in order to ensure decency and order in the church, the canons agreed at various synods and ecumenical councils, said that every cleric should be ordained to a particular office, or indeed to a particular church, essentially. So that's why, to this day, for example, at the ordinations of deacons or the ordinations of priests, and this is the same in the Catholic tradition and in the Orthodox tradition and in the Anglican tradition, when the candidate is presented for ordination, the title that they are being ordained for is given. So in the case of a deacon, so-and-so is being presented to serve as deacon of blah, blah, blah. Likewise, priest ordination, to be priest, to serve title at blah, blah, blah parish. Likewise, bishops, when they are consecrated, again, to be consecrated bishop of blah, blah, blah as title. So in other words, for decency, in order to ensure that everybody is responsible for and attached to a particular location. This was to counter against the Latin term Episcopi vagantes, meaning wandering bishops, or vagrant clergy, meaning, as it were, clergy of no fixed abode, who were often excommunicates or schismatics or apostates, heretics, but who basically were not attached to anywhere, would go around and cause mischief. So the councils wanted to make sure that recognized clergy were nominated to particular places, so people knew who was where and etc. So titular sees, now this arose in order for what were originally called core episcopi, meaning choir bishops, or auxiliary bishops, who would be assistants to a diocesan bishop, in order for them to be legitimately consecrated, as it were, according to the canons, they need to be given a title. So the practice arose of titular titles, titular sees, and these originally they tended to be of defunct sees, or historical sees that were no longer operative. Later on, of course, as the Ottoman Empire grew, many places that had formerly been Christian were no longer so. The organization of the church, of course, collapsed, and that provided then a lot of titular sees. So in other words, dioceses that no longer existed. But this meant then that auxiliary bishops could be canonically consecrated, named for, title to a see, a local church, as it were. So the tradition in the Orthodox Old Roman tradition is for bishops to be consecrated to titular sees, because, and this is an important thing really for anyone who's interested in Old Romanism to understand. The Old Roman tradition, as it sees itself as, I suppose, set up in parallel. Essentially, the old Roman position is that the Holy See has erred. The Holy See is in error over, for example, the introduction of new dogmas, which, from a traditional Catholic mindset, is the antithesis of what it means to be Catholic. Catholics believe that which has always been believed everywhere and by all. The idea of introducing a new dogma, like 2,000 years after the Apostles, just seems a bit strange. So from the old Roman perspective, the Holy See, the papacy, is in error. And so in the mandates that are read for the consecration of old Roman bishops, the wording in Latin is such that our bishops are consecrated for the sake of the Holy See at Rome. Meaning, basically, we're waiting for the time when the Holy See will be restored to authentic Catholic tradition and praxis. That's essentially where we're coming from. So the old Roman tradition really is not about establishing a separate jurisdiction. So old Roman bishops exercise jurisdiction, and they exercise canonical jurisdiction, so, following canon law, etc. But they exercise it for the sake of, basically, until the time when the Holy See reverts to authentic tradition and doctrine. That is why we don't have cathedrals as such. Now, that's not to say that actually historically there have been old Roman churches and cathedrals, but our understanding has always been that we exercise jurisdiction canonically until such time as authentic tradition and doctrine is restored to the church. So that's the long answer. It could be longer, but that's the answer to your question there. Okay, right. Well, bless you all. Thank you for watching. Thank you for keeping me company. The whole purpose, really, of this show is just literally for me to let off some steam, as it were, and to share my thoughts with whoever's interested at the time, simply because of the lockdown. So thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for your interactions. Thank you for your questions and for your comments. What can we do about any or all of this? Well, we can just keep on keeping on, essentially. As some of you will realize, that old Romans have been waiting for the restoration of authentic tradition and doctrine to return to Rome for 150 years or so. So we've learned to be patient, and patience, of course, is a virtue that all Christians should have and should inculcate and exercise. So all the topsy-turvy chaos and naff stuff that is going on at the present time, my advice to you, my brothers and sisters, is focus on your salvation. Focus on the salvation of others, and the rest of it, don't worry about. Where you have influence, where you have the opportunity to speak, where you have the opportunity to influence, then seize them, take them, do it. But there's no point really expending energy on negative emotions and thoughts concerning all this. Just remember that we are citizens of heaven by virtue of our baptism. We are here in exile. Just remember that this isn't all there is. Remember that Jesus will be returning, and when he returns, his kingdom will come, and all that God originally desired for us will be realized. And whether or not that happens in our lifetimes really doesn't make any difference to us as Christians, because, of course, We believe and trust in God. We have our Christian hope. We believe in the prospect of the perfection of creation and all things at the end of time, irrespective of whether we die today, tomorrow, next week, or in 10 years' time. It really doesn't matter. So all these things I know are very troubling. They're very concerning. But the best we can do is to keep on keeping on, remain faithful. Remember, God is faithful to those who are faithful to him. All we can do is live by his commandments, fit, form, transform, conform our lives to the way in which he desires us to live them, in anticipation of that restoration of perfection that he originally conceived for us and for our world. So let us just carry on, my brothers and sisters, regardless of what goes on around us. But as I say, when you do have the time, and when you do have the opportunity, not the time, when you do have the opportunity to influence or otherwise act, then do so. And none more so than in exercising charity, than in exercising love of neighbour, particularly in these difficult times. And I'm sorry to say, my brothers and sisters, the predictions are that it's going to continue to be difficult for a little while longer. But if every Christian exercised true charity during this time, we could make a real difference and a real positive impact on people's lives, and possibly even on our communities and societies, such that all these things that trouble us could be changed for the better. Who knows? But God is faithful to those who are faithful to him. God bless you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Yes, I couldn't resist that little commercial break there.